Hey, here's a question for you today. Are you the keeper of your family's history? When you leave, will your history leave with you? Do you know things that nobody in your family knows? How are those children and their children going to know about your grandfather and your great-grandfather? Is someone responsible for your family's history? Well, our next guest was very concerned about that. And for the last number of years, she has been doing a family newsletter. She's been keeping all of her family in touch with their history. My name is Vin Dacquino. Our next guest is, by all means, a record keeper. Her name is Betty M Light Behr. Betty, let's talk writing. We've been friends a long time.
Yes, we
You
have.
never cease to fascinate me with your wonderful stories about Putnam County. You are a historian. We need to know all about you. We need to know about your passion for history. Talk to us, Betty. When did all of this start, and where does the light come in your name?
Well, the Light is my maiden name.
Okay.
And we have a very long history right here in New York State, back to 1709
Wow.
with the Lights.
Really?
And they came in first from the Palatinate in Germany and came into, were shipped here in order to make mastheads and tar for Queen Anne. And they were sent to the West Camp, which is now near Newburgh. And then from there, they went to Rhinebeck, which was the East Camp, and then they came down through Dutchess County into New York, where we are now. My family homestead was out of the Commissioner of Forfeiture's property.
Wow.
And
so you're
that was-
Revolutionary War people.
Yeah, we had a number of soldiers in the Revolutionary War. My great-great-grandfather on my mother's side was there, and so that's my father's side. Now, that creates a problem,
Okay.
okay, because I'm twice blessed. Do you know what that means? Is
No.
that I have lights on both sides of the family.
Oh, wow.
And there's no relationship between them by marriage and otherwise for 8 generations.
Really? Although they have the same last name, they were not related. That's unlike the Luddingtons. Remember, when I was doing Sybil, I was amazed to find that Sybil Luddington's mother and father had the same
Well, they were
last name.
cousins.
It turns out they were,
Yeah, they were
first cousins.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in those days, you could marry within your first cousin.
Yeah, and they
but they
did.
passed a law after that that said that
Said
you
you
could
could.
not. So
Yeah.
then it's very frowned on to this day. But I always laugh because my mother was working in just after she graduated and got back from being out in Toledo, where she had her hair cut. She got back, she was 19, and she was working in a photographic studio in Danbury, Baisley's. And my father came in, and Mr. Baisley said, Elsie, come out here and meet your cousin. And she came out. She didn't know who she was going to meet because she has lots of cousins over there.
Yeah.
And she met my father.
Wow.
And my father was from an entirely different line of the family. My mother's is German-Dutch, and his is English-Irish.
Wow.
And so I have been very interested since I was born, practically, in family.
You know, you are a records person. Your full-time job is working with records in Putnam County. Tell me a
No,
little.
in just town of
Oh,
Kent.
I'm sorry, Dutchess County. Tell me a little.
Town of Kent
Town
is in
of
Putnam
Kent.
County.
Get it straight, will I? Yes, Town of Kent. So tell me a little bit about that. What do you do? I mean,
Well, the funny part of that is, I have said, and it reminded me when your former guests, everything that I've done in my life has come to fruit in now that when I'm doing the records for the town.
yeah, isn't it funny
Because
how life has a way
everything
of
that I've
tying
done,
in?
I've been, well, I was an inspection on ball bearings at the old Barden company, which I hated. I hate factory work. And this was inspecting ball bearings that went in the They were special for the Norden bomb site, and then they transferred them to the X-ray machines.
Wow.
And when they were first started, and so they had to be inspected to tolerances and so forth. And I went to work there for a while. I was working for the motor vehicle department and license plates when they were made by the prisoners.
Records.
And we had to send them out and everything. I worked for the district attorney's office as a clerk and filing and in filing briefs and stuff like that for district attorney and later Supreme Court Judge Frederick Dickinson. And then I worked in the telephone company for 2 years and worked my way up from just a messenger, which took messages from one place to another or to the supervisor, to a long-distance operator, long distance in 1 year.
Wow.
And I had the help of a supervising operator. But I discovered in order to get any higher in the telephone company at the time, you couldn't be married.
Really?
Once you were married, then you could only be an inspector, but you had to work up from the bottom to become an inspector, chief operator. So I decided that wasn't for me.
No.
So then I went to work for a bookkeeping company that made electrical connectors, all kinds of molds and things. This doesn't sound like it had anything to do with it, but I did invoices and put them in order and
Yeah, it has
sent
everything
out
to do with
orders.
it, because
so
that's
everything
what you
that
do
I
here.
did, plus I always wrote. I did quite a lot of poetry.
And you still
My
work,
mother,
right?
I was still working. I am still working.
Yeah.
I went to work for a 6 months job in the town, and I'm still there. And that was in '97. So, and that about is the time when I had started my newsletter after serving as bicentennial commissioner from the town of Kent. We started writing the book, which is called The Profile of Kent, the town of Kent, and it's a history. And we
Right.
did it as a you are there kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was published. We had our trials and tribulations. We had lost.
I mean, I remember that when I was doing the research for the call to arms. I used that. You know,
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
a number of things, and there was a light. What was his first name? Who had done articles, and I used some of Richard Light. That's right.
Yeah.
And I used some of his articles and some of the information he had.
Yeah, and I put you in charge of the local historian from out in Catskill when you
Yeah.
were looking for information on
That's right.
Catskill.
That is right.
So these were things, but I started actually right after my father died in '74. I decided I had all these contacts and all these records and that I would like other people to really know them. So I started out with my little newsletter. It was only 2 pages at a time.
Now, when did that start?
In 1979 and 80.
Wow, 79 and 80, that was the first newsletter.
First one, and it was done all by hand on my old Selectric 3 typewriter, and then I graduated from the 2 pages into now it is 10 pages or
Wow.
more, and it is published not by me anymore. I did it for 30 years.
Wow.
And then in '97, I decided that I was going to pass it on to a different person, but I had to be very careful because the scope of this doesn't just entail New York State. This entails Europe.
Yeah, because the
And-
lights kind of spread out.
Well, we have some wonderful documented history. We have a Colonel William Light, who was made the Surveyor General in Australia and surveyed
Wow.
all of the Adelaide and the harbor and everything. He did all that.
Wow.
And laid it all out with Governor Hindmarsh, and to this day they have a commemorative urn that they drink tea out of at their commemorative
So
day.
this wasn't just a little hobby. This
No.
turned out to be quite a project.
This was a love.
A love,
Because
a passion.
this was history that we made,
Right.
that we contributed to this country, whether we were soldiers or whether we were just plain farmers or whether we burnt coke for the winter time in order to make money to live in the farms or whatever it was, we made our fights. And when we have our students come to the schoolhouse, that's the one thing I try to impress them. They are history,
That's
no
right.
matter
And
what their lives are.
You do that well. I mean, boy, between the two of us, we've entertained
A lot of children.
few hundred students who have come in and out of that schoolhouse. Just mention a little bit about that schoolhouse, because you blew me away the time when I said, yeah, well, you're pretty familiar with this schoolhouse, and you said, yeah, well, my husband attended this. And I was like, oh my God.
My sister is in many of the pictures
Wow.
on the walls that we have with the schoolhouses.
So where is the one-room schoolhouse?
It's at 407 Farmers Mills Road.
407 Farmers Mills Road. That's
And it's
up the
open-
road from the Kent Elementary School.
And it's open on Thursdays all day.
And it's a museum.
And it is a museum having the natural artifacts that were from the original school building,
So that
which
we can
was
see school
1900.
books, we can see desks. The slate blackboard is still
The
there.
blackboards.
The dunce hat that I probably would have been wearing most of the
I
time
don't
if
know
I
about
attended
that.
there. No.
But we have the other industries too that Farmers Mills represented, and we have a diorama outside which shows you what the community was like.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then when you go into the schoolhouse, you see the actual pictures. We have 9 now actual pictures of the 11 district schools.
Wow, including the one
Including
that
the
Sybil
latest
Luddington
one.
went to.
Yes, we do.
Which is really amazing. Naturally, it doesn't amaze me that things that the kids love the best is the male and female outhouses.
And they were
behind
in
the
use up
schoolhouse.
until the last couple of years
Wow,
because we
that's
had
amazing.
permission from the
Yeah. And
department. of
then
Health.
in front of the schoolhouse, as you're facing it to the right, is a
We call it the shelter.
yeah, like a diorama of the Sybil Luddington.
No, those are the wheel mills and the actual mill
That
grinding
were on-
stones that were in the mill, and we had to move it onto our property because
Right.
where it was in Ludingtonville, the vandals were getting into it and breaking things
And now
lighting
that's
them.
another thing that the Kent Historical Society keeps up is the site of the mill. And I noticed that a lot of work's been done there.
Yes,
they have
Clark
picnic
and-
tables there now and
Yeah,
chairs.
Clark made that. Clark
Wow.
Darling made that. He's done a lot. He's a wonderful craftsman.
Yeah, it looks
He's done a
great
lot,
there.
and he got a group together that cleaned up all that brush, so now
Yeah.
we can see the stream. And with all these rains and everything, the stream has really been doing its best
It
to
looks
look
great.
beautiful.
And then there's the foundation.
The foundation,
I always tell the students.
Richard Othmer had engineered getting that and the foundation for the museum part of the center building.
Right.
And the center building belongs to the town, but we are wards of it and trustees of it, so therefore we have the jurisdiction of what. Richard worked very hard before he even became a legislator. He was town historian, and he worked very hard with everybody in order to get the plans all made. The plans for the center is going to be for a museum, a welcome center, and an office for the town historian. And then upstairs will be our offices
Wow.
for the Kent
So
Historical
you are
Society.
so involved in county history. Right from the beginning when I was working on this, your name came up over and over again. Then, we've had our wonderful breakfasts and lunches together, talking about so much of this history, and all of this ties together into this newsletter that you do, and it just shows the passion that you have, and the Lights will have the opportunity to know who their ancestors really were, and the people of Putnam County, because you've done an awful lot for this county.
Well, we have a lot of books that are resulted in the actual newsletter and the information that they find out of it. So my premise in the first part, let me read you just a little blip out of this. This was my first editorial column. In the last few years, we've made great contacts and breakthroughs in putting together the Light family data from our own distinctive Light and variant spellings and other variant spellings and branches. Time is swiftly marching on, and with it, some of our best sources and resources of information will be closed or passed from us, archival and personal as well. In recent issue of Connecticut Nutmegger, reported that in a meeting in Connecticut Society, the state registrar would like to see all records closed to the public because even genealogical and family researchers misuse and destroy the records. Now, when documentation of facts is so needed for the truthful presentation of family genealogy and fraternal organizational requirements, I don't need to tell you these vital and military records are one of our most important tools. Therefore, I invite you to participate in this publication, a 2-page newsletter, 1-page requests only to put your direct contact with other light searchers quickly. 4 issues a year, and it goes on to tell you. And that's what my whole premise was of putting this together. I had so much information. And from this, I was able to be contacted with a manuscript that was for a book that was already put together but stopped in 1950 with the death of the author. And his son came to me at one of the reunions. There are 9 different light reunions in the whole country.
Wow.
And I tried to get to almost all of them, but at least once or twice a year.
That's like the Ludington reunions. Those Ludingtons still do reunions. I go to them, and it's fascinating. These people come from Canada, England.
Yeah.
I mean, they're from
Well, the
everywhere.
oldest light one we have was started in 1902 in Lebanon, Pennsylvania,
Wow.
which is all lights. Even where Bethlehem Steel was, there was a lights the cemeteries were all lights properties of all their farms and stuff. There's the Light Forts Foundation. It's a Pennsylvania Trust now, and it was a building that was built in 1749 on the old Penn patent, and it was given a portion of it to Caspar Wispar, his name was, and he was a button manufacturer, and he had this big piece of property, and he sold it to the Lights.
Wow.
And the Lights all lived there, and they're Mennonite, they're Pennsylvania Quakers, they're everything.
Speaking of lights, tell the audience what your grandfather's names were.
All right, my great-grandfather was a twin, okay?
Great-grandfather was a twin.
Now, they were born here in Kent. They were born in 1815 here in Kent, okay?
Last name's Light.
L-I-G-H-T, just like the light bulb, okay? And my father's great-grandfather was Night Light.
Night Light.
His twin brother was Daylight.
Daylight. So your great-grandfathers were Night Light and Daylight.
Yes, and they were born a month apart.
They were twins and they were born a month apart.
Yeah.
All right? That's one for you to figure out. Twins born a month apart. How can that be possible?
Well, one was born before midnight. That was Night Light, my great-grandfather.
Night Light was born before midnight in what month?
And April.
In April.
April 30th.
And Daylight
Was born in May 1st.
May 1st.
And
Different months.
And the funny part of it is they both had Christian names, but my great-grandfather insisted on using the Night Light through all his records, and even on his tombstone
So
is
his
Night
tombstone
Light.
actually reads
Yes,
Night Light.
He died in 1854, 59 years old. And there was a story about that too. He was supposed to have fished in when the fish come up in the spring. And they had 2 boats, and they'd put a net between the 2 and a light in the middle. And they go at nighttime, and they catch all these fish.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
these are very well known around here. So it's in April, and they're out there, and we heard this was during the time when Vanderbilt and one of the other counterparts of Daniel Drew were going up and down the river trying to get the speed limit by using the boilers, you know, the steam boilers.
Yeah.
And they would blow up the ships.
Oh.
But what happened, well, they get too hot, and then
Yeah.
I'll tell you another story about that one. Anyway, the ship went between the 2 boats at night and overturned him, and well, he drowned. So he only drowned at 39 years old.
Wow.
But we can never find that out. And I was doing some research for someone else and ran across a notice in the paper in 1854, and it was the wrong grandfather. It was my grandfather Lee, which was my grandmother's grandfather.
Oh,
And he was
no.
the one, so it was the wrong one. So we got the wrong information. That's why you have to double check on all these
Now,
things.
speaking of the right information, I mean, research for this newsletter was no piece of cake. That was a lot of hard work, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So where did you have to go? I mean, did you find yourself, in and out of places?
I had a lot of correspondence because I had been collecting family information.
Yeah, you're a record keeper.
I had been collecting since I was about 15.
Wow.
And I lived with my great-grandmother's furniture. My mother, for my birthday, every year would go and find, she broke up her home, my great-grandmother broke up her home in 1865, right after the Civil War. Wow. And she gave a piece of her furniture to every one of the children, and she had 8 kids.
Oh, my
so,
goodness.
we got back, my mother's side of the family, got back the great big grandpa chart. Well, we called it the grandpa chair because it was huge. And so I found a table that would belong to another cousin, and my mother got that for me. And then we got a little lady chair that went with that. So my bedroom is the only antique room in the house.
Wow.
And I have their pictures hanging in oval, old-fashioned
Oh,
frames.
yeah. My mother has those too.
I have all the old albums that they have, but like so many things, they're not named. Yeah. And my father knew that Nightlight had pictures, but we never could find them. And his oldest brother married 3 times, and the last one was a widow, and she decided that their only son could not have the trunk of his mother, who was his first wife. So what happened after she died, he went to his other stepbrothers and he said, I want my mother's trunk. So he got the mother's trunk, and in the mother's trunk were the pictures. And my Aunt Edith had very painstakingly written on each one who it was and how old they were, and he was tickled pink. And he ran right up to the house and he said, I'm having copies made for everybody, so we don't have to look for these anymore. So I have pictures of Nightlight. I have pictures of his second wife, Sarah, and I have pictures of all his siblings, and when they were babies as well as when they were out. Now, all 4 of those boys, my father's 3 brothers, and his sister, but all 4 boys were photographers and early on, so they took pictures of everything. I have 1 million pictures of my grandmother, but I haven't got one picture of my grandfather.
Wow.
My own grandfather, I do not, and I can't find one in the whole family.
Wow. So,
but I have my great-grandfather, Knight.
Betty, you are a family genealogist. That's what you are. And what do you recommend for people out there who want to do that for their own families? People who say, well, I'm really not a writer. Well, you don't really have to be a writer so much as a researcher and genealogist,
That's right. You have to go and ask people, talk to people. I will put in one caution, though. It's like the story about the drowning.
Yeah.
You got to make sure you got a record to back it up.
Look at Sybil. Look at what I went through with it, remember?
Just what I'm saying is, I just found out with Ancestry. Ancestry is wonderful. It's a good outlet. But don't just stop with what they give you, because you've got to have the documentation behind it. Because those things are supplied by other people, not always from a document.
So it's work. You really have to do some. Not only do you have to get information, but you have to verify it, confirm it. You have to make sure that what you have is right. Look what Sybil. Mm-hmm. For years, people wrote in books that she was the mother of 6 children. Wasn't. That she married Henry Ogden. Didn't. He was a lawyer in Catskill. Wasn't. Her son was a hero in Kansas. Was not.
The biggest caution we have is don't use hearsay.
No.
Make sure that if you hear it, check it out.
And if you're going to use hearsay, say it's hearsay.
Yeah.
And,
yes.
and
I've done that too, and it doesn't always stick. Because once you put something in print, it's gospel, and that's not the way it should be.
No, it's not.
But what happened was I found that one of the wives of my cousin, I'll just put him cousin this way, it's too far to go back. Anyway, I found out her name was Hannah, and that she died. And she left a will. So I went down. Of course, it was here at the county building, so I was lucky with that.
Yeah.
And I looked it up, and come to find out, she doesn't mention anything about her former family. It doesn't say she was the daughter of or whatever. But down in the witnesses, you can always look to the witnesses because they're usually either family members or somebody close that is informant that signs for the will or signs for the
then you
letters
can-
testamentary.
Then you could check them out.
Well, I had two men that were from Bedford that I knew were family friends that were listed as her witnesses. And so I said, now the man's name was Belden, okay? Their first son's name was Belden, okay? Now, the letter that was, the will, or the letters of administration was signed with Higgins and gave his father and son, Abraham and John. And I knew they come from Bedford, and one of my sides of my family, my mother's side, came up from Bedford to Danbury and settled in Danbury. So I looked, and sure enough, they were close friends. So I said in my newsletter, I said, Hannah could either be, possibly be, a Belden or a Higgins.
Yeah.
I found this as a witness in her will or her final surrogate papers. But they picked it up as Higgins, and I've never
no.
been able to say, no,
No,
I
it's
said
not.
that was a
Yeah.
probability, so be careful
So
what
Betty,
you're putting down.
your advice to people out there is be a family genealogist.
Oh,
do some
it's
research.
history.
It
We
is
are
history.
all
That's
history.
right. We are history.
Yes.
And you need to get that history and pass it on so that future generations will have the opportunity to know where they came from. You've heard me say this before. I'll say it 1,000 more times. If we do not preserve our past for the children of today and teach them about yesterday, we're going to be stealing a little bit from their tomorrow. And it's so important that we teach children not to forget those who came before us.
That's right.
They are part of who we are.
Joe Darling made a motto for our Kent Historical Society.
Wonderful.
And she said, preserving the past in the present for the future.
There you go.
And it got it
There you
right
go.
there. And
Well, ladies and gentlemen, all I can say is it has been a wonderful time with Betty M Light Behr. Always a pleasure to be with you. I think your message to the people is a clear and good message. We're all writers. Writing the family's history is a very important part of writing. It is your legacy to your family.
But it doesn't have to be all cut and dried. It can be fun.
It can
and
be
that's
fun.
what I've
and
done.
you've been
with
having
this.
fun with
Yep.
it for 30 years
Or more.
or more. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing Betty Behr, and thank you for tuning in. Tune in again. We'll have more writers for you, and we will continue having fun. Betty,
That's good.